recognize you by name, and then unmute yourself. When you're not speaking, please keep your microphone on mute. A reminder that all comments by members should be addressed through the chair, and with regard to the speaking list, the clerk and I will do our best to maintain the consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they're participating virtually or in person. So pursuant to Standing Order 108.3.1 and the motions adopted by the committee on Tuesday, January 30th and Thursday, February 15th, 2024, the committee resumes its study of the distribution of federal government funding among Canada's post-secondary institutions. It's now my pleasure to welcome from ACFAS, Martin Maltais, the President, and Sophie Montreuil, the Executive Director. From the Canadian Federation of Students, we have Ghislaine Akumi, National Treasurer, and each individual has 5 minutes for their remarks. So we'll start off with Mr. Maltais or Madame Montreuil.
Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. First of all, good day. I'm Martin Maltais, President of Funding and Educational Policies at UQAR at Rimouski. And also I am responsible for higher learning in that area. I'm accompanied by Dr. Sophie Montreuil, my colleague. We're very happy to hear about the federal government's interest in funding at the post-secondary level for some years. We have been interested in it for some 100 years. We have worked hard to see to the Francophone funding in this area as compared with Anglophone funding. We have 6 satellite entities in Canada, and we support mobile learning throughout Canada. This is prosperity, and it is something that is very important for our country. I would like, first of all, to say, to give you a bit of contextualization with respect to the work that is being done in Canada in French and I would speak to the new Official Languages Act. We have the 2 major communities, linguistic communities, that are involved in research and also in promoting the flourishing of our various entities. We support the recommendations in the Bouchard report and also what you are putting forward in your report. And also, we are in favor of a budgetary envelope that has been long awaited, that will be of great help to the organizations that provide the subsidies to students. In fact, I can say that there is a significant gap between the ability of post-secondary Canadians to obtain their funding in French. And I come back to what you have said here with respect to the difference in among Canada's various post-secondary institutions. In 2021, 74% of these public funds went to the 20% of the researchers who were already the best funded. And amongst those universities, only 2 were Francophone universities. 1 alone was bilingual. Anglophone members of the U15 group, that is 12 of them, shared most of the funding, but 40% of the teaching corps, the professors, were involved in that. Francophones had to share less in terms of the teaching corps. And I do say that universities have become more productive. But still, let me point out again in 2021, 2.9% of the funding from the 3 councils went to the councils.
Mention the bells are ringing if we have consent to continue with the presentations. Okay, thank you. Continue on. We have about a minute and 10.
OK.
Très bien. Okay. Thank you very much. So the committee should deal with the new mechanisms that it is establishing, particularly under the Official Languages Act, which recognizes the fact that there are minority language groups involved in academia here in Canada and throughout North America. Unity research and academic research is something that is of great import for Canada. Without that, we cannot proceed, but we do have to support the small and medium-sized universities. You have to take into account the principles that are necessary to have well-performing universities. First of all, you have to promote researchers in all scientific disciplines, and also you have to promote colleges and universities that are in proximity to Francophone and minority groups. This is something particularly of interest for the Francophone scientific community, and you have to attract international students that would be able to work with the standards that we have here in Canada. I thank you for your attention.
Kumi.
Merci.
Thank you very much, Chair, members of the committee. I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to the issues that are facing students in Canada, post-secondary students in Canada. My name is Ghislaine Okumi. I am National Treasurer of the Canadian Federation of Students. We bring together some 530,000 students and 63 student associations, including 20 graduate student associations everywhere in Canada. I'd first of all like to acknowledge the tireless work that graduate students across the country have done to bring this point to our attention, and thank you for the work that you and others have done under Support Our Science, the Canadian Association for Graduate Students, and many others across Canada need significant investment. Many are funded only at the poverty level. This is an investment that is something that was in the budget, and that is a step in the right direction that would allow us to be more competitive internationally. But significant measures have to be taken to modernize research and to breach the gaps that exist. So, we are happy with what has been done in the budget, but we can't stop there. We have to be able to carry on with the first attempt that was made to make changes, not just for students, but I have to say that some students often have to say, should I pay rent? Should I pay for food? Or should I put that money towards continuing education? Canada is 26th in the OECD ranking in terms of the proportion of persons who have done post-secondary education. There are a number of researchers that is really lesser than in many other countries. So what is important is that Canada has to increase its investments in university funding for graduate students, and it has to lighten the burden, the financial burden of students. You know, it's a 6-year average to be able to reach the highest levels of academia. We need funding, and not just for research, but for the researchers. There has to be a human dimension to this in terms of rent and housing, in terms of food. All of this has to be taken into consideration for the highest levels of education. Doctoral students also have to represent Canada internationally. It is a matter of competitiveness. And the U15 is something that is got to be proportional, not just representative of some universities, but proportional to the smaller institutions that exist in Canada. And therefore, we would also want our universities in Canada to make greater investments to lessen the dependency on international students and still to keep their head above water in terms of finance. Canada should invest to meet what is set out in the Official Languages Act, particularly for those who are living in the minority language situations. Funding for higher learning, post-secondary and beyond, postdoctoral, is important, but research in the first cycle of academia, we speak a great deal about higher education that is at the level of the master's and the PhD, but we do not speak about research at the BA level. So we feel that all of the students should have the same benefit of opportunity, no matter where they are geographically speaking. There should be more diversified research, more innovative research, but something that reflects the local economy as well, which would incite local talent to come into academia.
4 5-minute rounds, if you guys are okay with that. If we could, no?
Just keep an eye on the vote.
Yeah. Could we do 4 or 5-minute rounds? Okay, let's start with Mr. Soroka, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to the witnesses. I'll start off with Ms. Okumi there. You brought up about housing and the crisis that many students are struggling to find affordable accommodation. What insights can you provide on the extent of this issue among student population, and what immediate steps do you believe could be taken to alleviate the housing challenges for students?
Merci pour votre question.
Thank you for your question. I'd say this. In our experience, most universities that are in the U15 are universities in major centers. Housing is difficult for the students that want to study in these areas, and it's difficult to find. Sometimes they have to stay home or they have to share housing with other students. The U15, as I have said, is in urban centers. Secondly, with respect to the funding that the students have, here in Ottawa, it's $1,200 to share a room here in Ottawa. You have so much of the funding that for research that students receive goes towards living costs. They have to pay for their food as well. And if you have conversations with these students, and we see that on the campus, because at the end of each year, the assistance funds are exhausted. They are exhausted, and there are many students who can't make ends meet towards the end of the academic year, and they have to turn to other sources for food. They can't live in accommodations that are shared. Sometimes they look towards housing in a house itself, but it is really more expensive. So all of this to say that this is the situation at the present time. They are overburdened with costs. As to what you can do with the problem, I think you have to look at the Quebec model to see if say Ontario should look at Quebec. In Rimouski, $380 it would buy you some housing. But elsewhere, say in Montreal or in Toronto, it's 3 times that. So your tuition fees in Quebec can be reduced for certain cases, but it's not the case in other provinces. For postdoctorates, you do have your bursary or your grant, but you still have the burden of tuition. So basically what I'm saying, tuition should be reduced, and there should be greater support that could be provided for students doing research.
Okay, I'll just ask the question, and then she could reply back in writing then. In light of the rising inflation, particularly in sectors critical to students such as food and housing, how do you see these affecting student budgets and financial planning, and have there been notable changes in student spending patterns or financial stress levels due to inflation? If you could provide that in writing, please.
And actually, sorry, Gerald, Mr. Soroka, we have you have another minute and 10.
Oh, well, then you have a minute and 10 to
Time to
answer, so be
answer.
brief
Time to
then.
answer. Yeah.
Donc, j'allais dire que
I was just going to say that the main thing that you have to look at is food banks on campuses. That is an indicator of how inflation has changed consumption habits. There are students who are using food banks. They never did in the past, but they have to now because of inflation. And you have to look at the number of evictions that students have experienced because of inflation. And we have student legal centers on campuses. Legal services are offered to the students. So tax services are offered, but as I said, we've had instances of where students have been unable to pay their rent. They were evicted, and that they had to turn to the legal center to help them. I'm sure you know also that it is difficult to obtain
Thank you for getting that in. We can always get more in writing if you have. Ms. Bradford, for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to our witnesses who traveled here in person to give us your expert testimony. So my question, I guess, will be directed to Dr. Malte. On April the 18th, Céline Poussillon du Recours of the University of Quebec told the committee the following. Since 2004, the share of total research funding granted by the federal government to Francophone institutions has been declining. Francophone researchers now receive a percentage of the funding that is smaller than their demographic weight. For Canada to maintain the vitality of all of its communities, it's imperative that more funding be provided to those institutions. So the question is, what are the effects of the concentration of research funding on Francophone institutions, particularly in minority settings? So whichever one of you wants to take that on.
Well, I didn't really understand the interpretation. I can begin again. It's clear that there are some very significant figures that speak to the inequity in terms of access to research for certain institutions. And here I'm thinking about small and medium-sized universities. That affects individuals and professors as well. Also, there is unequal access to research for small and medium-sized institutions, and also for Francophones. One important factor that can be pointed out for this is language. When you have a researcher who wants to speak in French, or to research rather in French, in a bilingual institution, may not have the same services to effect that research or to obtain that funding if they want to do the research in French. Many Francophone researchers are to be found in small and medium-sized institutions where there are fewer professors, smaller budgets, less of funding in terms of the granting councils. It's almost a caricature of the situation. More you put money into research, more you'll have others. Less you put in, the less you'll have seeking that funding. So that being said, in that Francophone community and in these small and medium-sized entities, these institutions experience, and that's what the witness, Madame Pozelin-Aucourt, pointed out to the committee.
Recommendations would you make to the government and granting agencies to improve the situation of Francophone institutions?
If you're asking us what type of improvement might be made, well, it's clear that something has to be done to give an advantageous result. Sums of monies, investments have to be made to produce ground rules that would promote small and medium-sized universities and also Francophone universities in this country. Because really that reflects our collective, our wealth as a country. If you have organizations that are best funded and most able to stimulate research, well, it is often found in larger centers at advanced research, postdocs, and so on. So there is also and always academic research that is ongoing, but it's clear that in a context that we have now, the Canadian people are being condemned to a lesser academic wealth, if you like, than other countries or other provinces that can change the structure that they operate under.
Yes, please.
Président, je débute mes questions avec...
Chair, I'm going to start with Mr. Malte. You mentioned in your opening remarks the lack of balance in funding in Canada and the discrimination against Francophones. Anglophone universities in Quebec, in an area, of course, where it is majoritarily French-speaking, receive more than smaller universities. It doesn't make sense at all when you think of it in terms linguistically. So they get more funding, research funding. New Brunswick, Moncton University, Saint Jean campus. In the same minority context, they are much less funded compared to the situation of the minority community in Quebec. How do you explain that? Well, to my mind, the rationale to explain this is linked to the way in which funding is effected. Of course, we are in a culture of excellence because it's academia, and we are in centers of higher learning, but it's not always a movement towards excellence. Sometimes the critical mass may be able or not to do the research in their own language. So when you have 74% of the funding from Canada in the hands of 15 universities, representing only barely 50% of those who attend university in Canada, and the universities themselves, and you look at what is existing elsewhere in the country, there is a significant gap. you have to ensure a quality of experience that is equivalent throughout the country at the university level. And when you think in terms of the French language, it's even clearer that there is a difficulty. Those 15 universities are more able to perform at the master's or doctoral level than many Anglophone universities that receive the 70-some% of funding from the Government of Canada. There is an issue, a language issue, a linguistic issue here in this country that is linked to the French language. You can't act in such a way that it only has a consequence on one partner. There has to be an effect on the other partners. For example, the Francophone partners, and also the effect on the community. There's a limit to excellence. It's not just resources here. If you throw all your money out the same door, you're creating a critical mass of talent around it. Yes, you speak well to the notion of excellence. Would you not agree that there should be a system for funding research in Canada that stresses excellence in institutions, but most of them are Anglophone? They are in an Anglophone system, a network like U15. So how can we better share the funding for amongst universities, including those small and medium-sized Francophone universities, so that they get funding, as opposed to those other universities that receive the lion's share of funding in Canada? Well, first of all, we're looking at quality and excellence here. There's a specific context that is involved. An institution is part of the universe in which it's developing. So I really can't answer, but I can make a corollary. I have a colleague, Michel Embroidered, who is working at a university like a symphony orchestra. The comparison can be made. The better the musicians, the better the symphony that you will have, the symphony orchestra that you will have. So it's a bit like that. You have to, at some point, of course, redistribute sums of monies. And you have to, and for us, we think that there should be an attachment to French language research, first of all. And that should reflect the Francophone contribution. It's better than 9 over 1.141 million.
5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here today. I'm going to start with Ms. Ukumi with the Canadian Federation of Students. And I first want to thank your organization and all the other students that banded together in support our science to force the government finally to raise the level of postgraduate scholarships and fellowships to a rate where you could at least live. I'm not sure whether you could live well, but now a master's student will be getting, if they get a scholarship, will be getting $27,000 instead of $17,000. It's a big difference. And I'm just wondering, and there was a lift in the amount of Tri-Council grants that will also help fund other students. I'm just wondering if you could comment more fully in that sphere alone, what more needs to be done with that kind of support the federal government provides. It strikes me as it's good, but it's not up to the levels that we see in other countries, for instance.
So, désolé, j'allais parler en anglais. Donc,
So what I would say is this. The first thing that has to be done would be to increase the general envelope, the overall envelope, So that would represent an increase in the amount of monies that each student would get, but there is a limit to the number of students. Yesterday we asked, would the level of excellence guarantee students receiving a bursary or a scholarship, and the answer was no. That you have to look. We were told it was cost-benefit analysis that would be taken into account. And when I compare my experience I'm a doctoral student, when I compare my way of life and my standard of living to friends who dropped out of doctoral studies, out of a PhD preparation, or just did a BA, they have a far better standard of living than I do. And then you have to look at Francophone students in particular. I give you this example, the Black identity, or the Indigenous identity, and the Francophone identity must also be considered by the Tri-Council before they grant. Many students who are Francophone have difficulty publishing, studying in French. All of these issues have to be taken into account. More money overall is necessary, but you have to look at it this way. Particularly, I would say, the government has to, the funding has to be conditional. Today, when the government gives funding to universities, it doesn't tell the university where to invest that funding. And so the university has that money, and very often it doesn't fall into the hands of the students. It is the institute itself that may well give higher salaries to professors using that money. So more funding overall, and that funding has to be directly earmarked for the needs of the students.
To pick up on that, just the general funding that governments, both provincial and federal, give to universities has declined over the last 30 years, and that's one of the main causes that tuition fees come up, so students are on the hook for that. I'm just wondering if you think it would be valuable for the federal government to have a funding stream when they're funding, sending money to the provinces as we do now, but now there's no strings attached at all. It's, you could send money to, fund universities, but it's used to pave roads. Would it be useful to have a program that said this stream of money is for post-secondary education period, and let the provinces decide how to spend that, but say this is what it's for?
Oui, absolument. Donc, nous,
Yes, absolutely. We want to have, we've always wanted to have a post-secondary agency at the federal level. Really, at the federal level, we have to have somebody there who would be the watchdog. Everything that we are seeing at the provincial level is reproduced at the federal level, but we're told at the federal level.
Because we are getting very close to votes now. Thank you. I think we'll suspend. I'd like to get another round of questioning in, if you're able to stay for that. We're just juggling that. We do have some extended. We're going to work on that during the break and see what we can do for the second panel. But for now, let's do a quick vote, and then we'll come back and talk about the remainder of the meeting. Conservatives, 5 minutes, Liberals, 2.5, 2.5, and then do a quick panel change to get an hour in with the tri-councils. So we'll start with our first questioner is Mr. Lobb for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks very much. Do we lose a guest, Mr. Chair? Yeah.
I'm sorry, unfortunately, she couldn't stay for,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I guess you guys get all the questions then. Congratulations. Depending on what school or what organization or representation has appeared before the committee, one theme they have said is there should be more funding overall. And we know we're going into tough times from a budget perspective, massive multi-year deficits, which do play a part. It's not an excuse not to fund research, though. But some of the big U15 representatives, they feel like they're adequate to do the heavy lifting. But if you want to provide funding to the smaller universities or those not in U15, they're happy to see what's left over. The smaller universities or the universities that aren't in the U15, they say, give us a chance and we'll show you what we can do. It does seem, though, the system is a little rigged towards the U15 taking care of the U15. Am I wrong in saying that? I think I've heard testimony saying that they'd like to set it up in a way that kind of, maybe I'm saying this the wrong way, but it does rig it towards them. What are your thoughts on that?
Moi, j'attendais.
No, I was just waiting for the interpretation to finish. It's very clear. Yes, you're quite right. When you're in a context, when you are dealing with people that are benefiting and preferentially from a system, it is more difficult. And so as a government, if you say, I have to look at what benefit is being drawn from this in Canada, so as I said, 9 over the 41 million people in Canada, there is a discrepancy. If well, what is the effect for Francophone researchers? They are in a minority group. All the figures that we have seen to date indicate that Francophone researchers are in a minoritized group. So in Canada, this question of people who are in minority situations in Canada, well, we are in the vanguard of trying to correct the situation for those in linguistic minority groups. But it's even clearer for those who research in a minority language that there are difficulties. It would be nice if there were a box to check that indicates I'm a Francophone researcher, and that there should be a sharing of resources. In Canada, you've got 65,000 Francophone researchers in Canada, 35,000 of which are in Quebec. And then there's the rest elsewhere in Canada. But they don't produce French research. That is to say, research that is produced in the French language. And this is a major issue. I'll explain it briefly, why it's so important. Demographically, we are growing in Canada. Millions are being added over time to our overall population. And therefore, when you look at that, with respect to the Francophone universities and their situation, I ask you, how are they going to be able to train and retain Francophone professors within Francophone universities? This is something real. This is something that has to be looked at, and answers have to be found for it. Why? Because what is happening here in Canada is we have to produce our own Francophone researchers in French.
For you folks is almost on a daily basis, you can read an article in any of the news publications in the country that talk about the living conditions and the standards that some of our university students are facing, and certainly the exponential growth in foreign students attending Canadian universities. And it's I think back to when I was of that age.
I'm sorry, Mr. Law, but we are at time.
Is that right?
Yeah,
Well,
could you ask the question quickly and we could ask for it in writing?
I guess I'm just asking, should we review what the numbers should be? Do you folks have an idea of what a Canadian university and a Canadian taxpayer's obligation is, and what is the correct number of foreign students as a percentage of the school population?
Great, thank you very much. Thank you to our witnesses. Now to Dr. Jasek for 15 minutes or 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair.
That's why I had to push you, Ben.
So certainly we've heard through the course of the study that there was a need for more funding for science and research here in Canada, and I'm sure everyone is very happy to see that our proposed budget includes those measures. But our task on this committee is to look at the distribution of those funds. And we've heard some suggestions that probably do have an impact on smaller colleges and universities, and in particular the administrative burden in terms of the applications themselves. And so, as we were told, lead investigators are increasingly spending less time doing their research and more time doing the administrative work related to cumbersome funding application processes, and is obviously much heavier on smaller institutions. So do you have any particularly concrete suggestions on how this administrative burden, in other words, excessive red tape, could be reduced?
Thank you. Thank you for your excellent question. Our association represents Francophone researchers throughout the country. I often say that it's one thing, one reality to be a Francophone researcher in a Quebec university, but it is quite different to be a Francophone researcher in an Anglophone researcher, a Francophone researcher in a university elsewhere outside of Quebec that is bilingual. It's two different realities. There was a 2-year study published in June 2021 where we looked at over 500 researchers who were Francophone but who did it outside of Quebec. They had a higher level than higher workload, higher administrative burden than was the case for their counterparts in Quebec. They had to teach more. There were services that are provided to community. That's one of the 3 missions that are earmarked for universities, and therefore they had to do that. All of this means they had less time to do research and also to seek funding for their research. We have to help them obtain time that they need. It was said that universities are provincial in jurisdiction, but in terms of jurisdiction, but you have to stress, nonetheless, the fact that a Francophone professor or researcher anywhere is entitled to submit his request for funding in French. It's in the Act. If you can't do that, there is another service, a new one that we offer in my institution, which is quite simple, which helps Francophones seek funding in French. So to have more research in French, you have to have more applications that are made in French, and there have to be more establishments that would be able to provide that. University X, let's say University of Saskatchewan, if it were to receive more French applications, they get more funding for that. So more applications, more funding, it's like a circle that completes the whole picture.
I think I'll just
Okay,
pass that.
thank you, Dr. Jacek. And over to Mr. Blanchet-Joca for 2.5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais poursuivre mes questions pour
Thank you. Earlier this morning, your colleague spoke to the vicious circle in terms of the funding of research in Canada. We have spoken about certain initiatives, measures that have been taken to promote real equity for Francophone researchers in Canada. Now I'd like to hear you about the value that is attached to Francophone research in Canada. What are the successes that Francophone researchers have been able to achieve? Certainly, they make requests for funding in French, but fewer than those applications for funding in English. So give me an overall idea of what access they have to funding, of what their success is, no matter what institution they represent. The issue, thank you, first of all, Mr. Blanchet-Joca, for your question, but the issue is this. You have researchers who work in a specific area, and the ground rules, the rules of the game, don't make it easier. They promote English research. And one thing we do in Canada, and we do it well, is we want to help minority groups. We want to put ground rules that are fair and equitable in place. We do it in other areas very well in Canada, but in academia, when universities don't produce enough in group or collegially, there were rules that were set in place. So if you put in place rules that would promote the talent, that would draw in new talent, 30,000 researchers outside of Quebec who are Francophones, but who do not find their voice, that is to say, to be able to do their research in French. That would help.
2.5 minutes, Mr. Cannings.
Okay. Well, merci. We've heard a lot today about the struggles that students face with living conditions and living costs. I heard someone, and I forget who it was, who suggested that you could find accommodations for $300-something a month, which is remarkable. It certainly would be impossible in British Columbia. I'm just wondering, and perhaps this is rather off topic, but could that be a drawing card for students and researchers to go to smaller institutions where they could they could live a decent life, have a roof over their head? I mean, we hear about the food banks students are forced into. When I look at the costs, the biggest cost that I see students facing is housing. And I think they're going to food banks because they just don't have any money left over. But I'm just wondering if you could comment on that maybe this is an advantage that smaller institutions might have.
Vous avez raison sur.
You're right about the principle that is an advantage for smaller institutions in terms of the cost of living. But the reality is this. Researchers have to deal more with other tasks in these smaller universities, like my colleague said earlier, administration and so on. If you want to promote research, you want to increase access to it. It's not. There are students in the major cities that have, the lion's share of superior researchers who are looking at the postdoctoral level and so on. And it is because that there is funding there. If you look elsewhere, there are specific special niche organizations where they could do research where it would cost less. But a major part, institutionally speaking, of the funding goes to these postdocs and so on. And so could we not find inspiration to bring in more Francophones from elsewhere in Canada if we had ground rules?
To Madame Montreuil and Monsieur Montreuil for being with us. And unfortunately, Ghislaine Okumi had another commitment she had to go to. But thank you to all of our witnesses. And if there is something that we need in writing to clarify, please do submit that. And we'll do a quick change of panel. We don't have anybody online, so as soon as we get people in the seats, we'll resume our meeting. I'll just suspend just for a minute. From the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, Dr. Alejandro Adam, President, and Dr. Marc Fortin, Vice President, Research Grants and Scholarships. And also returning to us from the Social Scientists and Humanities Research Council, we have Dr. Ted Hewitt, President, and Dr. Sylvie Lamoureux, Vice President, Research. You each have 5 minutes for your opening comments, and we will start with Dr. Tammy Clifford, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to thank the committee for having invited me here today to appear before you. It's a privilege for me to be here to support your very important work on the distribution of federal government funding among Canada's post-secondary institutions.
Health Research, or CIHR, is the largest funder of health research in Canada. CIHR serves a vibrant health research community of up to 16,000 world-class researchers annually that is more diverse than ever before and that excels across all pillars of health research, from biomedical and clinical to research on health services and population and public health. It's important for you to know that peer review underpins the fair and transparent process that we use to choose which applications to fund, protected from biases or conflicts of interest. And this means that eligible applications submitted to competitions for funding are each reviewed by an independent panel of experts in that field. These experts volunteer their time to assess and score each application, guiding decisions on how to allocate the competition's funding envelope. Through its College of Reviewers, CIHR is systematizing reviewer recruitment to identify and mobilize the appropriate expertise for the review of all funding applications and provides reviewers with the knowledge and resources necessary to conduct consistent, fair, and high-quality peer review. As we know from the report from the Advisory Panel on the Federal Research Support System, otherwise known as the Bouchard Report, for Canada to truly maintain research excellence, we must support world-class research across all regions of the country in institutions of all sizes. That is why the membership of CIHR's College of Reviewers and its peer review committees are assessed for demographic gaps, including regional representation, to balance the perspectives provided in the peer review process. Additionally, all peer reviewers are offered training to make them aware of and enable them to take actions to mitigate against several potential biases, including those related to institution size. With regard to supporting health research in Canada, CIHR recognizes that research takes place in a wide array of institutions, and for us, this includes research hospitals. To facilitate that relationship, eligible research hospitals can apply directly to us, as opposed to relying on an affiliation to another institution, such as a university. This enables research hospitals to lead world-class health research that stretches beyond the priorities of the universities with which they are affiliated, contributing to the diversification of research that we fund. It is true that post-secondary institutions account for the largest share of CIHR funding, including important research being conducted in smaller institutions across our country. However, in an effort to remove systemic barriers to accessing research funding, we have recently encouraged non-traditional institutions that have mandates to use research knowledge to improve the lives of Canadians, such as community and not-for-profit organizations, to become eligible to receive CIHR funding. We have done this by simplifying the process to become eligible to administer funding, reducing the administrative burden, and harmonizing the process across the 3 granting agencies. These non-traditional institutions may be eligible to hold CIHR funding depending on the criteria of the particular funding competition. For example, following consultations with representatives of Indigenous communities, CIHR has updated its eligibility for its flagship program, the Project Grant Competition, and since fall of 2020, individuals affiliated with Indigenous non-governmental organizations in Canada with a research or knowledge translation mandate have been eligible to apply directly to the competition. And as of right now, there are currently 11 such organizations eligible to hold funding and to host funded researchers. We know that a broad and inclusive health research ecosystem is a strength and advantage for Canadian innovation, and we are proud of the steps we have taken to broaden this eligibility. Taken together, these institutions enable the Government of Canada to support a diverse portfolio of health research. En conclusion, Monsieur le Président.
In conclusion, I can say that we will continue to adapt to new conditions, and we remain determined to strengthen the capacity for excellence in research in all its diversity, within and outside of university places and situations. I'm here to answer your questions.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I am pleased to be here in my capacity as President of the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, commonly referred to as NSERC. Je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion.
I thank you for giving me the opportunity to appear before you today, along with my colleagues from SRSR and CIHR. First of all, let me start by outlining how NSERC invests its funds and our investment objectives. This will help provide more context to the question being studied by the committee.
A country of discoverers and innovators for the benefit of all Canadians. We invest in talent, discovery-focused research, and innovation through partnerships and programs that support post-secondary research in the fields of natural sciences and engineering. We provide support through grants and scholarships, with the majority of NSERC awards being allocated to individual researchers or trainees. Applications are evaluated on their own merit, and the process focuses on factors such as the excellence of the researcher, the quality of the scientific proposal, and the plan for training students at all levels in preparation for research-intensive and